creators, world artists, ladies and gentlemen, it is really a great honor for me to be here talking to you today. I am very honored at having been invited. I believe very strongly in your project. We are not numbers. And I am so proud and happy to see how far you have come since 2015 and what you have achieved along the way. Allow me first, please, to thank the organizers, Inas Ghanim, Ahmed Naouk, whom I had the pleasure and the privilege of meeting and discussing your inspiring project. And of course, Pam Bailey and your international mentors and supporters here with us today. And thank you for your efforts in creating this wonderful organization and giving voice to the voiceless, as Ahmed just said. And also, of course, thank you for inviting me to speak to you today, to offer you whatever wisdom I can from my own experience as an ambassador, a diplomat, and before that as an advisor to the president and an academic researcher and writer, lecturer myself. Those were the best years. I very much support this project because it is clear to me that one of our strongest weapons is also one of the most basic, which is the truth. The truth, my friends. I am also painfully aware that even though truth is on our side, precious little else is. Nothing else really on our side except the truth. At least when it comes to taking action in support of our just cause, we see very little happening. I want to give you an example from my world. Palestinian diplomats, academics, and activists constantly refer to international law. We always do, as you may follow. Why? Because international law is unequivocal. It is unequivocal about the illegality of seizing land by military force. It is unequivocal about the illegality of expelling civilian populations from our lands and denying us our right to return. And it is unequivocal about the illegality of any attempt at consolidating a military occupation, such as building settlements in occupied territory. There is, outside the far reaches of pro-Israel fantasia, no argument against this. There is no argument about the clarity of international law, international provisions, international rules, the post-Second World War global order. Any international, European or US diplomat, officials understand this quite well. This is ordinary discourse at the UN and commonly accepted as the basic framework for any negotiated outcome. And yet, where are we? Precisely nowhere. Why? Because while the arguments are irrefutable, Western governments in particular remain unwilling to take the necessary steps to compel Israel to fall in line. That's the naked truth. Without Western action, I am afraid the rest of the world is powerless. As evidence, I offer you the numbers of countries in the world who have recognized the state of Palestine versus the ones who have not. The score is 138 countries for us and just 55 who have not recognized Palestine. But these 55 include the most influential today, sadly. And yet, most diplomats among these 55 also understand that they are standing against the tide and the letter of international law. For this reason, my friends, whenever we bring up international law, we embarrass these officials who full well understand the argument, the logic. For this reason, too, Israeli officials understand that their strategy has to be to intimidate rather than convince. And I want to repeat this. If you follow the Israeli strategy, particularly in the media side, in the public affairs, public relations, in the outreach, it is to intimidate rather than convince, because convincing they cannot. They have lost the argument, but returned their influence. To give a vivid example of this, my friends, look at how the popular discourse on Palestine is changing in the US even in the US Congress. So reliably and blindly pro-Israel over the years is beginning to hear dissenting voices. And I'm following this, having been, no, it's okay, it's all right, these things happen. But I was saying, to just give a vivid example of what I was describing of some change in the public opinion, I was saying, look at how the popular discourse on Palestine is changing in the world, in Europe, and in the US. Even in the US Congress, so reliably and blindly pro-Israel over the years, the Congress is beginning to hear dissenting voices. Why? Because while officials may be trained to ignore these stories, they hear. I mean, whatever we tell them, they are very well trained to actually avert, to avoid, to ignore. But ordinary people respond to them at an emotional, human level when they ring true. To give another example, and I deliberately choose the US and the UK, since these are the last two countries to which I have been posted, look at the discrepancy between official discourse on Palestine in the UK and the tens of thousands who took to the streets to protest Israel's assault on Jerusalem and Gaza last year. You know, the Sheikh Jarrah, the house evictions, and the war on Gaza. Look at the discrepancy between the UK government and the official position and their own public. I mean, I was absolutely astonished in the positive sense when I took part in these demonstrations. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. And not only in London, by the way. London, Manchester, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Wales, what have you. We may not move officials who have 1,000 weasel ways to evade taking action, but our words do move people, my friends. Our words, your words, do move people. Your writings, your posts. What we have to understand is that while we may embarrass officials from these countries with arguments rooted in international law, we are not changing their positions. We're not. I cannot claim that no matter how good we are at arguing our case with governments and officials, our success in changing their position is unfortunately limited. What will cause change is domestic pressure. What will cause change is domestic pressure, public opinion. And what influences domestic public opinion is understanding, sympathy, and solidarity. And that, my friends, is where you come in. Here comes your historic role as writers and media activists. And my friends, stories can move mountains. It's true, very true. Stories can mold thoughts and shape history, shape narratives. Stories can bypass minds and go straight to the heart. And stories entertain and provoke. Half of who I am is about the stories I used to hear from my grandmother. Some of them is terrifying, I must say. They are a unique way in which you, the authors, speak directly to an individual's mind, to our minds. Have you ever wondered why Israel spends so much time, so much energy, so much resources trying to stop us from teaching our own history, our own narrative to our children, our stories? They are preventing us from telling our stories to our own children under the pretext, the smokescreen of incitement. This is not just that they want us to forget our history. No, it is because they want us to forget who we are. Who we are. Our history, my friends, shared and individual, shapes how we think about ourselves. It shapes how we think about them, the other. And the good news is that as long as we can tell our own stories, our struggle will continue. It will continue as long as we continue telling our story. It will end. We will vanish if we stop telling our story. It is our duty, therefore, to resist this attempt at erasing us. And make no mistakes, my friends, Erase our history and you will erase our sense of ourselves as a people. And with that goes our shared support as Palestinians, our communal sufferings, our communal experience, our collective experience, our separate identity. It is a distinct identity. It leaves us with little if we do not tell our story. And that is exactly, my friends, what Israel seeks. They want us to be a lost people, a people without identity, easily molded, comfortably contained. What they have forgotten is that we have always told compelling stories in the form of poetry, writings, political speech, and what have you. What they have forgotten is that not only are our stories compelling, our people are compelling storytellers. From Mahmoud Darwish to Ghassan Kanafani, and the list is very long. I mean, Mahmoud Darwish was not just a poet, he was a national hero and a creator of our narrative and who we are as a people. What they have forgotten is that our history is lived now. We are not talking about something happened 74 years ago. We are talking about something that has been ongoing until this very moment. I've just learned, and we are reading and following, seeing the horrific footages of what is happening in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem as we speak, today and yesterday. What is happening before people's eyes, and however much their leaders want us to be silent and go away, we are not silent and we will not go away. That's the simple truth. We will not go away. So we have to keep telling our stories and our history, my friends. This is a matter of survival. Telling our history, our narrative, our stories is a matter of survival. It is not just a matter of portraying our stories or conveying our message. It is existential. It is existential. We have to tell these stories first and foremost among ourselves. We have to tell our stories to ourselves by learning and relearning and teaching and reteaching our history, our own history, to each other, but also by telling our individual histories and stories and those of our families, not just the national story. We need our individual human, every one of us, every family of us, every household. And this is what makes our history. This is what makes us. And it is the way we forge a community of what we know as the people of Palestine. And this, the forging a community between Palestinians wherever they may be, because we have become a global tribe because of the Nakba and the denial of our right of return and the exiled communities and the checkpoints and the blockade on Gaza. We are scattered. But the narrative, the story is hugely important to our present and to our future and to the entire struggle of our people. I know perhaps in a way in which you in Palestine and elsewhere do not, that there is a large Palestinian exiled and diaspora out there. More than half of our people are outside, exiled, unable to go back. Those people long for connection with our people at home, with you. And by home, I mean all of historic Palestine, because many of them came from different parts of Palestine. Those refugees forced out of their homes 74 years ago are part of the Palestinian story, narrative. Actually, in fact, it is the heart of our narrative, the refugees. Our story, our national story, did not begin in 1967. It did not begin 55 years ago. It began in 1948. Actually, sitting where I am in London, it began in 1917. the infamous Balfour Declaration. But the action of that, the consequence of the Balfour Declaration was executed in 1948 and the Nakba. So the refugees are the heart of our story and narrative, and I invite you to connect with them. And those exiled communities tell their own story. I hear them everywhere. I go in the US, in the UK, in Europe, elsewhere, in the Arab world. And that story is part of the Palestinian story. That story is us. Their memories, their connections, what they have heard from their mothers and grandmothers about the Jaffa oranges and the Haifa ports. It is of the utmost importance that connections are made and maintained between the people here at home and in Palestine. And the refugees, whether in the Arab world or further afield in South America, in Northern America, in Europe, in Africa, because as you say so clearly in your mission statements, and I happen to have visited your website many times and I follow your great work, we are not numbers. We are not statistics. We are not refugees, victims, second-class citizens, fighters, or martyrs. We are the Palestinian people. We are individuals who share a story. That is the Palestinian story. We are, every one of us is a world of his or her own. We are now everywhere. We are a legion yani katibe. And we stand and we fall together. That's the essence of who we are. That's the essence of our story. And so, my friends, we need to tell our collective and individual stories, and we need to tell them well. We need to tell them right. We also need to tell just stories. We need to tell stories that engage people from all over the world. We need to utilize the power of literature and fiction. We need to perfect the ancient art of storytelling. As Albert Camus, the French and philosopher, the French writer and philosopher, once said, I'm sorry, I have a cold, once said that fiction is the lie through which we tell the truth. Fiction is the lie through which we tell the truth. Because stories are an essential part of the human experience. It is through stories that children learn best. It is through stories that we learn how to look at the world through someone else's eyes. It is through stories that we learn to feel what others feel. It is how we learn to empathize. It is the power of storytelling. And I'm saying this because I want to second who you are and what you do and what you write. We can all read about how many people have been killed and wounded in one particular act of violence somewhere along with a description of their demise. But can we feel what these people went through? Can we truly sympathize without an understanding of what it is like from their perspective? That is the power of storytelling. Stories confront us with the human condition, but it does so from the perspective of someone else who writes about these victims. If we are willing to suspend our disbelief, there is truly no better way to learn about each other than telling our stories. And so this is our task, my friends, each in our different ways. I tell our story all the time, my story as well. I do not leave an opportunity when I am on BBC or CNN, what have you, to remind them that I was born in a refugee camp in Rafah to the very south of Gaza, and to tell them the story that I grew up with, story of my parents and grandparents. The politicians and journalists have to tell stories that stir emotions, but are restrained by the facts. That's the unfortunate truth, particularly the politicians. They want to stir emotions, but void or restrained at least by the facts. The writers, you, artists, your mentors have no such restraints. You have no such restraints, but they have to tell stories that resonate. We have to tell stories that resonate. For all, compelling stories involve mastery of language. Language كثير مهم يا أخواتي وإخوتي وأصدقائي. Language مش Palestine, it's Palestine. مش BLO. The language is important. We must master it, and it is not difficult. I mean, the human determination. I just told you I was born in Shabura refugee camp in Rafah. And I learned English when I was in the 6th grade, and it was. But I decided that I want to convey the language. So, and there are many like me, all over, and I meet many Palestinians like Ahmed and others who graduate from British universities and others. So we do not lack the language, but we must master it. Not only the English, by the way, even the Arabic or any other language. The choice of words, the terminology is paramount. One word could explain everything, and one word could actually mislead. It is also, or it also imparts a certain amount of responsibility on us as we tell our stories. Even in fiction, we have to be careful with the word we choose. The power lies in language and truth. Language and truth. If people believe that occupied territory is actually disputed territory, you see, this is a term that Israel always used, and some international officials, politicians, disputed territory. If people believe that it is disputed, that is a function of language that dramatically impacts action in the international side. This is a story that the Israel have told with some success, I must say, that this is not occupied territory, this is disputed. There is no better illustration of this than the old phrase, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. The key challenge for us is to make everyone, including our enemies, understand that we are freedom fighters. That we fight for our freedom. That our cause is just, that we are on the right side of history. We are, my friends, greatly aided in this endeavor by actually being on the right side of history. We're not trying to be on the right side of history, we are on the right side of history. But history is littered with the debris of those who were on the right side of history, but no one ever heard. And even if they did, no one ever helped. يعني التاريخ مليان بشعوب اللي كانت عندها قضايا عادلة ولكن اختفت. Being on the right side of history is no guarantee of anything. Do you remember the Igbo People's Liberation Struggle? Right, neither do I. So choose your words carefully, my friends. We have to choose our words carefully and choose them with deliberation. Should we, for instance, use the word settlements, which to Americans or to the American ears or Australian or Canadian ears could bring to mind the quote, heroic settlement of North America by Europeans. You know, it might be a good thing to settle the land and bring the European technology to these native, poor, backward. Remember, this settlement happened only after the almost total erasure of the native population there in the US through warfare and disease. Or should we use the word colonies? And I'm just trying to describe the power of words. Is it settlements or colonies? To better illustrate the efforts of outsiders to claim land already in someone else's possession. Like what is happening as we speak now in occupied East Jerusalem. And, of course, the West Bank, Sheikh Jarrah, Silwan, what have you. And on a regular basis, every other week, we hear of a new settlement being built deep in the West Bank on a land that belongs to somebody else. In Arabic, for instance, my friends, I follow some of our people who often refer to Jews when we mean Israelis. Why? Let us be precise. Our problem is not with the Jewish people, not with Jews or Judaism. In fact, the most vocal voices in the international arena, and I attest to this, in the US and Europe, for justice in Palestine are Jewish. So we should never say Jews. It is Israelis. It is Israel. And by the way, it is primarily the Israeli government and the Israeli officials who are responsible on what takes place. It's the state and the system and the ideology behind it, not the Jews. Also, let us not fall into the trap of the language of borders, hudud. Israel has no borders. It has never decided on its borders. We have no borders because we are still occupied. We may call them boundaries until there is a Palestinian state, but there are no borders. And let us understand our platforms. This is traditional, the traditional media like BBC, CNN, New York Times, what have you, etc. We have become, I must say, we have become quite good at speaking to them, all of us. Though there is a huge room for improvement. They make a joke that the biggest room is that for improvement, but there is a huge room for improvement. In traditional media, it is hugely important that we choose our words widely and precisely. At our fingertips, we also have the power of social media now. We must learn to use that power, my friends, really. I think we are doing a good job, as it happens. I think the Palestinian narrative has a strong presence on social media, in part thanks to your writings. But we are being fought by fool means, silly means, dodgy means. There are attempts at silencing us, even on social media. I happen to have requested a meeting with Facebook, and just at the beginning of the situation last year in the aggression in Sheikh Jarrah and Gaza, and I delivered a very strong letter to the management, the top management of the Facebook and some social platforms, that we see censoring of Palestinian voices and lack of any monitoring about the real incitement to kill that happens in Israel at the top level, including the Prime Minister at the time, Netanyahu. So we have to be savvy. We have to tell our stories without compromise to as many people as possible and still escape censor. We can escape censor, by the way, if we are savvy and clever. We can do all that. Remember, we are not the first and we won't be the last people to face such overwhelming odds. يعني مش أول شعب ولا آخر شعب بتعرض لهيك مشاكل، لهيك ظلم، لهيك استعمار، لهيك احتلال، لهيك عنصرية. مش الأول ولا الأخير. We must learn from others. لازم نتعلم من التانيين. We must learn from South Africans to Algerians, Vietnamese, all those who threw off the yoke of colonialism, of occupation, discrimination all over the world. How do we learn from them? How do we learn from them? We read their stories. We have to read their stories. The one story that affected me the most is Nelson Mandela's long walk to freedom. What a compelling story. We read their stories and link them to ours, to us. That will strengthen our stories. By reading, we learn. By writing, we teach. So, my friends, the struggle over narrative is one of the most important in our struggle for justice. I cannot emphasize enough for you the significance of the narrative. In this sense, every Palestinian is on the front line. كل فلسطيني في الخط الأول. In this sense, every one of us has a duty to tell our stories. But let us not bore our audience. ما نزهقهمش يعني. Let us not bore our audience. Let us not become that unwelcome guest that no one wants to invite. Let us tell our stories fluently and with confidence. Let us tell them humanely and with some humor, by the way. Humor is very important because you need to penetrate to their hearts. Let us also not compromise. We must not flinch. This is not just about, changing the essence. No, we must confront our audiences with difficult truths and ugly realities. We must at the same time engage and rebel. We must draw audiences into our realities, to our living rooms, to our neighborhoods, to our streets, to our cities and towns and villages. But in doing so, we must make them feel the horror of our reality. We must always make sure that our stories are human stories, that what the foreign press may report as a 47-year-old woman was killed. That's in the best case scenario. Sometimes they even report has died at a checkpoint. Has died? Well, died of what? To us, she's Ghayda'a Sabatin. To us, she was widowed early on. To us, she was half blind, mother of 6, who had dreams for her children. We want to tell her story. What dreams she had for her children and what her children feel right now. What are their dreams? What they want to be in the future? How are they going to cope with the catastrophe that has befallen them? And let us tell that story the way it is, my friends. Everyone in the world shares a love for their own children. Children, the precious thing. It is the one human thing that there is no discussion about. Rights of children, protection of children. Everyone in the world shares a hope for a better world. I myself was busy in the last few days about Ahmad Manasra and what happened to him, a 13-year-old boy. There should have been much more about Ahmad Manasra as an individual, as a human being, as a child. Not just that he was the victim of violence, and not just that he was tortured and interrogated and imprisoned and all that, but who he is, what he used to play, what are the instruments he likes. This is how you humanize. Why he had Khalid as his best friend. What Khalid did when Ahmad Manasra was taken away. This is what the audiences also want to see and hear and follow. Otherwise, it will be just numbers. Everyone in the world, my friend, understands the pleasure of a good meal. For instance, we have the best food. I mean, okay, I am biased. There are other good food, but we have a very good food. Our cuisine is distinct. Why don't we talk about it more and more? Our culture, our embroidery, our music. I mean, this is not just about suffering. This is also about the ability of our nation, our people, to still produce the best there is in culture, in music, in poetry, in food. Are you following how much Israel is trying to actually take away our culture? Appropriation, cultural appropriation, that happens on a daily basis. But also, everyone in the world understands the comfort of a loyal friend and the longing in a sad song. So we need to connect to people how they are relate to themselves, not just how we see ourselves, but how they see themselves. So talking about friends, talking about a sad song, talking about a good meal, all that. I want to end on a positive note, my friends. I've taken enough time. I started by saying we have the truth on our side. That is a fact. I also started by saying that we have not really gotten anywhere. Well, this is not really true. Because the truth is, we are here and we are very much alive and kicking. We haven't managed to completely erase us. We are here. You are where you are. في غزة وفي الضفة وفي القدس 48 وفي مخيمات اللاجئين وفي كل مكان, everywhere. And we are not just existing. No. We are existing and resisting. We are existing and growing. We are existing and raising our children to a very high standard. We have many issues, but I am so proud that we still have one of the lowest illiteracy rate worldwide. And we have one of the highest, if not the highest, PhD per capita graduates worldwide. And we are telling our stories that are spreading around the world. I assure you, our stories are being spread. The more we tell them, the better we tell them, the more they become part of the fabric of life everywhere, like Nelson Mandela, like the anti-apartheid movement. In that way, we are winning. Absolutely. Make no mistake, we are winning. Today, as never before, I think the world is listening to us. In part, this is because modern technology has made it possible for us to talk directly to people, unmediated by journalists and others. In part, it is because we have a good story to tell, one that resonates widely and across borders and cultures. And in big part, it is because of you here in this gathering and a mighty, capable new Palestinian generation. الجيل الجديد, الجيل الشاب, شبابنا. There is a mighty younger Palestinian generation, and I follow them with inspiration on social media. The power and the capability and the professionalism of how they tell the story. It's about the content, it's about the timing, it's about the images they choose and the footage. It is that story that brings people as far apart as London, Dakar, and Johannesburg into the streets to protest for us, for the people of Palestine, for the freedom of Palestine. It is that story, that narrative, that will one day, my friends, set us free. So, by way of ending this, keep telling it well, keep telling our story well. Thank you for all what you do, and thank you for this discussion.